May 3rd, 1945. The town of Lübeck, Germany, was drowning in chaos. Streets overflowed with families dragging carts piled with their last belongings, children clinging to exhausted mothers, and wounded soldiers limping westward. Among the desperate masses moved figures that history would one day remember with horror. Female SS guards, stripped of uniforms, carrying forged papers, blending into the endless tide of refugees. They walked unnoticed past British patrols, disguising themselves as widows or displaced workers, their crimes buried for the moment beneath silence and ash. Some would vanish entirely, others would be found decades later, and a few would face justice only at the very end of their lives. The scale of destruction across Germany offered cover to those who sought it. Berlin smoldered under Soviet artillery. Dresden lay in ashes from firebombing, and rail lines lay twisted beyond repair. Roads choked with millions on the move, displaced persons, liberated prisoners, starving civilians, all in search of shelter. The Allied armies pressed forward but struggled to impose order. British and American units found themselves overwhelmed by the flood of refugees, Polish laborers freed from camps, Red Army prisoners staggering from barracks, villagers whose homes had been reduced to rubble. Amid this chaos, the Allies hunted the most notorious male perpetrators. Joseph Kramer, the Beast of Belsen, Kurt Franz of Treblinka, and other high-ranking SS men were pursued through seized rosters, captured files, and survivor testimony. Within months, many were caught, tried, and sentenced. But for women, the story was different. Though their names appeared in diaries and Red Cross records, female SS guards often slipped through unnoticed. In places like Ravensbrück and Auschwitz-Birkenau, women had enforced terror with whips, dogs, and iron authority. Yet when the Reich collapsed, most were not immediately pursued. The attention of investigators focused almost entirely on men, allowing many women to vanish into the ruins of Europe. Among those who did not escape was Dorothea Binz, remembered by survivors as the Beast of Ravensbrück. She had joined the SS in 1939 and rose quickly, becoming chief overseer responsible for training other guards. Under her instruction, young women learned to starve, beat, and humiliate prisoners with methodical cruelty. Survivors recalled her laughing as women collapsed during roll call, striding through the camp with a riding crop, notorious for kicking women to death and staging public punishments. By April 1945, as the Soviets approached, Binz and two fellow guards, Hildegard Nommensen and Gerda Steinhoff, buried their uniforms, forged papers, and slipped into the chaos of refugee convoys. They bribed officials for ration cards and train tickets, vanishing among the millions. Yet, not all managed to stay hidden. Steinhoff was captured within a year and tried in Gdansk, where witnesses described her merciless abuse of prisoners, even pregnant women. She was hanged in July 1946 before thousands of onlookers. Nommensen was caught soon after, tried in Poland, and executed in 1948. Binz herself was captured near Hamburg in May 1945, tried in 1947, and executed at Hamelin prison. Her reign of terror had lasted 6 years, but her freedom barely 2. Still, her story was a reminder that terror could hide, at least for a time, within the chaos of liberation. Others vanished more effectively. Ursula Schüffler, a lesser-known Ravensbrück guard, slipped into refugee camps at Lübeck and Flensburg, registering under false names, taking on menial jobs, bribing officials for ration cards. She blended into the crowd, moving quietly from place to place, eventually settling in Schleswig-Holstein. Unlike Binz, she avoided attention, married, and lived as an ordinary housewife, her past never uncovered. She became one of many women whose histories disappeared in plain sight, ghosts among the living. For those who were notorious, justice was swift. In April 1945, the British liberated Bergen-Belsen and encountered horrors beyond imagination. Among the prisoners, one figure was immediately recognized: Irma Grese, the blonde beast. Survivors pointed her out at once, remembering her whip, her boots, her icy commands. She had worked at Auschwitz and Belsen, enforcing quotas, beating prisoners, and assisting in selections. Witnesses described her as a predator, her sharp eyes constantly searching for weakness. Captured on the spot, she was placed on trial in September 1945. Testimonies left no doubt about her crimes. Defiant until the end, She was executed that December at the age of 22, one of the youngest women ever hanged under British justice. But not every story ended with the rope. Some women survived by carefully managing their roles, presenting themselves as minor participants. Herta Ehlert, who served at Majdanek, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen, embodied this strategy. Arrested after the war, she admitted to her service but minimized her role, portraying herself as a subordinate who followed orders. At the Belsen Trial, her calm cooperation contrasted with the arrogance of others. She was sentenced to 15 years, later reduced, and released in 1953. She remarried, lived quietly, and died in 1997 at the age of 92. Her survival showed how cooperation and careful testimony could spare some from the fate of the gallows. The post-war years revealed the gaps in justice. Anna Klein, once a senior overseer at Ravensbrück, and later Sachsenhausen, held one of the highest positions available to women in the camp hierarchy. She supervised labor details, selections, and the administration of terror. Arrested after the war, she was tried in 1948, but acquitted for lack of evidence. Witnesses were scarce, records destroyed, and her responsibility blurred within bureaucracy. She faded into obscurity, living as a housewife, her crimes unpunished. Her case reflected how difficult it was to prosecute women who had not been visibly brutal, but who had enabled the machinery of genocide. Margaret Buber-Neumann's life underscored a different complexity. A communist activist imprisoned first under Stalin, then handed over to the Nazis, she became a secretary at Ravensbrück. Though not a perpetrator in the same way as others, her proximity to power blurred her story. After the war, she testified against totalitarianism in both its Soviet and Nazi forms, publishing memoirs that brought her recognition in West Germany. Unlike others, her survival became a vehicle for testimony, though it highlighted the tangled identities of women caught between regimes. More notorious was Hermine Braunsteiner, the stomping mayor of Majdanek. Survivors remembered her steel-studded boots, her beatings, and her brutal selections of children for the gas chambers. After the war, she escaped to the United States, settling in Queens, New York. For years, she lived as an ordinary housewife, working in restaurants, her violent past hidden. Only in the 1960s did investigators rediscover her, and in 1973 she was extradited back to Germany, the first Nazi criminal deported from the U.S. She was convicted on over 1,000 counts of murder and given a life sentence, though health issues secured her release in 1996. She died in 1999, having lived decades of freedom before justice arrived. Even clerical staff, seemingly peripheral, were later exposed. Irmgard Fürchner, secretary at Stutthof, typed deportation lists and prisoner records, her initials sealing the fate of thousands. After the war, she married, worked as a clerk, and lived quietly for decades. But in 2021, at the age of 96, she was charged as an accessory to the murder of over 11,000 people. Convicted in 2022, she received a suspended sentence, the court acknowledging her age but affirming her complicity. She died in 2025, her trial one of the last of its kind, showing that time could not erase responsibility, even if punishment came late and lightly. Alice Orlowski, another guard, moved between Majdanek, Płaszów, and Auschwitz, remembered for her cruelty, but also her attempts late in life to distance herself from her past. Captured, sentenced to 15 years, released in the 1950s, she lived quietly in West Germany, but later remarks denying the Holocaust brought her back into court in the 1970s. She died in 1976, her story emblematic of those who escaped full justice yet could never entirely outrun their past. Margot Dreschel, involved in selections at Auschwitz, tried to vanish during the final days of the war. Disguised among refugees, she nearly succeeded, but was recognized by former prisoners and captured by Soviet forces. She was hanged in June 1945, her death swift compared to others who vanished for decades. Others, like Elisabeth Volkenrath, deputy leader at Auschwitz, disappeared more effectively. She adopted false papers, lived quietly, and evaded investigators. Survivors remembered her, but without clear identification she slipped away, fading into anonymity. For the victims who endured her authority, the lack of justice remained a bitter wound. These stories together reveal the uneven pursuit of justice after 1945,